Finance.
Yeah, the agenda.
We're gonna go ahead and get started, so we can get out of here by noon, okay? This morning, we're gonna start annual board financial training, and Mark Phillip is gonna lead us in that charge.
Okay, very good, Rick, thank you very much. As you know, or as for those of you that have been here before, you know there's an annual training requirement that's required under the North Carolina General Statutes 122C-119-1, which requires the board training, and these annual training in these areas of fiscal management, budget development, and fiscal accountability. It's worth noting that the North Carolina Constitution in Article 5, Section 2, under state and local taxation, states that the power of taxation shall be exercised for public purposes only. And under subsection 7, it states that under contracts that the organization may contract with and appropriate money for the accomplishment of public purposes only. So let's start with the first area of training, which is fiscal accountability. There's a definition of fiscal accountability: the responsibility of governments to justify that their actions in the current period have complied with public policy decisions concerning the raising and spending of public monies in the short term, usually one budgetary cycle or 1 year. This definition comes out of the AICPA course on fundamentals of government accounting and reporting. It also goes on to state in that same course that consequently the GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, financial reporting objectives, consider accountability to be the cornerstone on which all other financial reporting objectives should be built. So how do we achieve fiscal accountability? Fiscal accountability is established through a variety of activities and processes and guidance. Internal controls, accounting principles, accounting system integrity, account reconciliations, cash management, investment of idle funds, deposit of funds, and disbursements. There are also external reporting accountability. We report, we have an extensive reporting package to the Department of DMA on a monthly basis, which is due the 20th of each month. We also have reporting responsibilities at DMH. We have the annual independent audit, which you all have received copies of the audit reports from the external auditors. We have semi-annual reports of deposits and investments, and then, of course, we have the financial reporting that we do monthly to the board of directors. Let's moving on to the next area of training, fiscal management. Fiscal management is the planning, directing, monitoring, organizing, and controlling the monetary resources of the organization to accomplish the objectives of the organization. So how do we accomplish fiscal management? Well, there are key activities or key aspects of fiscal management. One is government accounting, second is financial reporting, and the third key aspect would be internal controls. So let's talk a little bit about governmental accounting. Governmental accounting is the composite activity of analyzing, reporting, summarizing, reporting, and interpreting the financial transactions of governments. So adherence to those governmental standards is key in the fiscal management process. Once again, this comes out of the AICPA course for fundamentals of government accounting and reporting. Now there's a hierarchy of standards and of authoritative guidance, what they call the GAAP hierarchy. The highest level of guidance is what they call Category A. These are officially established accounting principles established by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And it includes not only the GASB statements, but it also includes the GASB interpretations. The next highest level of guidance is what they call Category B guidance, which is GASB technical bulletins, GASB implementation guides, and literature of the AICPA that is cleared by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. The second key aspect is financial reporting, and accountability is a constant theme through all of this. This financial reporting accountability statement says Once again, accountability becomes the paramount objective of financial reporting. The first bullet point is comparing actual financial results with the legally adopted budget. As you know, we do that when we review the income statement for the board. The second bullet point, assessing financial condition and results of operation. Financial condition is the review of the balance sheet, which we do each month, and the results of operation, once again, refers back to the income statement that we review. Assisting in determining compliance with financial-related laws, rules, and regulations. As you know, if you recall, in the audited financial statements, there are several statements by the external auditors that have to do with compliance with financial-related laws, rules, and regulations for the federal and state programs. So there's a lot of work that is done at the end of the year related to the independent audit that has to do with compliance. And there's also assisting in evaluating the efficiency and effectiveness of performance, and these are some of the things that we report to you on a monthly basis, such as the variance between the services, how we're doing on administrative expenses, all of those sorts of things. And this same statement comes up again. Consequently, the GASB's financial reporting objectives consider accountability to be the cornerstone on which all other financial reporting objectives should be built. Internal controls is another aspect of fiscal management. These objectives come directly from the policy manual for local government, Section 80 on internal controls. Reliability of financial reporting, efficiency and effectiveness of operation, compliance with applicable law. There are, half a dozen policy manuals promulgated by the North Carolina State Treasurer that have to do with, there are policy manuals for local government and have various sections. This just happens to be one of them. There are about 4 or 5 other policy manual sections that we rely on for guidance, as well as the governmental accounting standards. Now here are the reports that we typically give to the board on a monthly basis. We have the balance sheet where we compare, we show not only the current state of the financial condition of the company, but we also compare that to the end of the prior year and review any changes over that period of time. We also review the income statement and compare that to the legally adopted budget, looking at various components of the income statement. We also review the cash flow statement. We've added a component of the cash flow statement which shows the reasons for the changes in cash, not only for the current month, but for the year-to-date period. We also look at financial metrics. We look at the current ratio, the defensive intervals, and the medical loss ratio, which we discussed last night. So the third area of training is budget development. The key aspects of budget development, budget requirements, are that it has to be adopted in the fiscal year by the governing board before the beginning of the year. That must be balanced. The appropriations lapse at year end. Expenditures may not legally exceed the appropriations at the functional level, and any revisions altering the functional level by $5,000 or more must be approved by the governing board. So here's our budget time frame for developing the state fiscal year 2019 budget. By the beginning of March, the expense report, the departmental expense budgets are due from our department heads. By the 19th of March, the executive leadership team will review the departmental budgets. By April the 23rd, we will have a full draft of the budget for the ELT's review. By the 7th of May, the ELT will receive the full budget, which we intend to present to the board, which will include any changes we've incorporated since the 23rd of April. At that same time, we will publish the hearing notices the week of May the 7th. And on the 24th of May, the May board meeting, the budget along with the budget memorandum will be presented to the board. Any changes that we need to incorporate will be incorporated in the final final budget ordinance will be presented to the board for approval at the June board meeting on the 28th, I believe.
Is the budget done by an ordinance?
I'm sorry?
Is the budget approved with an ordinance?
I believe it's called a budget ordinance. I recall last year's.
I just don't understand.
That's Cobb County budget's a budget ordinance, Ronnie.
That's right. That's a legal, I mean, that's like a law. That's what I'm trying to.
Yes, it is a legally adopted document that we are required not to exceed.
In this timeline, when on 5/7, we're going to present it to the board. Then prior to that, it'll be presented to CFAC. So I don't see the CFAC timeline in here. So it'll be presented to CFAC prior to coming to the board.
It usually is.
Yeah.
So we probably need to, that Clark, he's not probably part of that process.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to make a note of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me see. Okay. So the elements of the budget, obviously, are revenues and expenditures. Revenues are reasonably predictable. We also have, we'll have some sense for the state allocations at that time. The Medicaid per member per month items are the capitation rates that the state will be paying us. We actually have a preliminary meeting on rates in Raleigh on the 7th of February, so hopefully we'll start to get an idea of what those capitation rates are going to look like starting in July. I would hope that they'll be finalized by the time, so we can work those final capitation rates into the budget, but that's somewhat dependent on the state's timeline to get those rates approved. There's also county maintenance of effort to consider in the revenue side, expenditures, state services, which are not an entitlement, the Medicaid services which must be provided are all medically necessary services. Okay, one last item for your interest is related to board member stipends, which are paid for attendance at meetings and trainings. The attendance sheets are submitted to accounting by the board clerk, and they're paid in the following bi-weekly payroll. Direct deposit is required, and that is identified as a Vaya Health direct deposit. There are W-2s that are issued for stipends, and stipends are optional. And board member expenses are reimbursed very accountable by an accountable plan, which means they're not taxable. The receipts are required. And since the board clerk position is currently open, if you have any questions, you can refer those to Kathleen. Okay, any questions? Yes, sir.
Hospital, not-for-profit, has a budget once a year, and that's it. This budget is amended every month. Is that correct?
Our budget?
Yes.
Our budget is amended when we get allocation changes from the state. And it's not necessarily every month, although the frequency has been close to every month.
Jack, you're bringing up a good point, and we talked about that last year as part of the budget process, that much of what we do is based on what we anticipate happening from the state. The allocations change, they're late. They're a very challenging business partner. Put it that way.
I'm sure.
But it is, right?
But it just seems like if you obviously a budget is always best guess as to the future, you know. So, you know, maybe you're good at it, maybe you aren't, maybe things are too unpredictable. But if you do it like once a year, that's it. Then when allocations change or whatnot, you say, well, that in this budget, but here we amend the budget.
Well, because we have to keep a balanced budget.
It has to be balanced.
So it has to, it has to, everything always has to be caught out.
Okay, I get it.
Is $5,000 the
limit that you have to make a change then, or if it's under 5, can you?
Yeah, under 5, we don't typically change the budget.
Is that 5,000 established by the board as the threshold?
You know, I can't tell you that exactly. I'm not sure whether the board established that or whether that's established as part of the
It is established
policy.
by the board, yeah. We dropped it, we used to be higher than that.
Thank you.
They had their hand in the till. Legal function foundations.
Okay, no more questions for Clark?
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. This is your annual board responsibilities, compliance and ethics training. The department is actually supposed to do the board responsibilities training, but they've never offered to do that for any of you, so I'm doing it instead. Okay. So, So why are we here? Well, we're here because General Statute 122C states that all members of the governing body for an area authority shall receive initial orientation on board member responsibilities and annual training provided by the department, which shall include fiscal management, budget development, fiscal accountability. A member's refusal to be trained is grounds for removal from the board. And so that's the boring legal reason why we're here. But I think we should maybe talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, why we're here. This is why we're here, right? Why do we need to do this training every year? Because I never, ever, ever want to see a headline like that involving Vaya Health, where the department, where the department has had to actually come in to the area authority, the LME-MCO, and oust the board for failing to meet its responsibilities and take over the organization. And so you can see that happened in November. We're all still kind of reeling from that, and it's had, certainly biggest impact has been on Cardinal, but there has been an impact on all of the LME-MCOs reputationally, but there's going to be some very real consequences for all LME-MCOs. We're expecting Beth Wood, the state auditor, has announced that she is going to conduct a year-long audit of all area authorities. And I've been corresponding with folks in her office for the past couple of months. They're doing a rate-setting audit right now of the department, looking at whether the department appropriately established our per member per month rates. So she is very engaged and very interested in learning more about what we do and our operations. I can tell you Clark just stepped out, but his team and I have been providing huge amounts of financial data to the state auditor over the past several months. So what did Cardinal's board do wrong? What do we think that they didn't do that they should have done? Well, obviously there was a total lack of oversight. There's all the sort of soundbite stuff, the lavish retreats, the Christmas parties, and all of that, but those are really symptoms. Those are not the problem. The problem was the lack of oversight and what I would describe as a cult of personality, where they accepted all the representations of their management at face value, even when they refused to share information with them. Some of the information has been trickling out in some of the articles, and I don't know how many of you have been able to keep up with that. I haven't even been able to keep up with it. It feels like there's 2 new news articles every day. But in some of those articles, it's been clear that board members asked for information. Brian Thompson, who is one of Centerpoint's old board members who joined the Cardinal board when they merged, he repeatedly asked for information and was not provided it. And so the board just accepted those representations. They had this cult of personality. They ignored the department. The department came on multiple occasions. Dave Richard came down to Cardinal's board to meet with them to say, hey, we don't think what you're doing is right. And they ignored the department. Several legislators, Tommy Tucker and others, went to Cardinal board meetings, said, hey, we don't think what you're doing is right. And they ignored those legislators as well. In fact, they actually refused. One of the things that Brian and I have found amusing is that Mr. Topping actually refused to meet with Secretary Cohen. He never met her face to face. On multiple occasions, she was in Charlotte or in the area and asked to meet with him, and he refused to meet with her. They obviously didn't understand their core functions, their core responsibilities, what it was that they were supposed to be doing. I can tell you, so Cardinal's actually having their training today too. Their board is getting round 2 of their training. They've already had round 1 because they've had to completely reconstitute the board, bring all of these new board members in. The last round of training focused on what I'm doing here today, which is sort of the board responsibilities, what are the statutes that describe what your responsibilities are, and Professor Botts, Mark Botts from the UNC School of Government did that training for them. And I can tell you one of the things that he pointed out was that on their website and in many public statements, they kept referring to themselves as a company or a corporation. And we are not a company, we are not a corporation. I've always been very, very careful to avoid using that word in any of our public things, even just simple things like the phrase corporate compliance, which is a very common phrase. I don't use that phrase because we're not a corporation. And so that was one of the things that Mark Botts really stressed, was that you are not a corporation, you are a government entity. And I think it's clear that the Cardinal Board lost sight of the fact that they were a governmental organization. And they clearly lost sight of their mission, vision, and values. Yes?
They wouldn't even, from what I heard, provide their CFAC with a place to meet. And I was in Charlotte Thursday. I volunteered and taught a WAM training with a friend of mine, basically across the street from one of their offices. And there were about 20 people there. And none of these consumers in the room had ever heard of CFAC. And a lot of them, it was a very diverse group. They all got a good explanation of what CFAC was and encouraged to apply. I said, now's a great time. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, so that would be part of that's actually a core function and responsibility in the statute. It is not, CFAC is not something, I mean, we do love our CFAC and we support our CFAC, but it's a requirement. It's written into the statute. So if Cardinal was not supporting their CFAC, they were in violation of the law. So what are our values? These are the values that the board had developed a couple of years ago. Person-centeredness, integration, commitment, and integrity. And we talk about these values all the time. I can tell you that our new employee orientation, which is a couple of day event for new employees, we don't sit them down in front of a TV and say, watch this video. Christina goes almost every month when she can, or somebody else from ELT, I'm there, and we talk to them about what our values are and what we expect from them as employees joining the organization. We are always coming back to those values. We're not a perfect organization. There's no such thing as a perfect organization. We know that, we roll things out. Maybe sometimes we don't roll them out well. We've been talking with Nancy about some of the stuff we've been rolling out around Vaya Total Care and Cato. And, Christina and I both looked at it and went, we're not sure that this meets our value of person-centeredness. And we need to go back and we need to really look at this so that we can make sure that what we are doing is person-centered. So these values are not just words for us. These are not just things that we put on our website and don't think about again. We talk about them, we incorporate them into our daily operations. Okay, so this is what the statute says. The governing unit of the area authority is the area board. All powers, duties, functions, rights, privileges, or immunities conferred on the area authority may be exercised by the board. Your overall responsibility is to engage in comprehensive planning, budgeting, implementing, and monitoring of community-based mental health, intellectual and developmental disability, and substance use disorder services. What are your primary responsibilities? Well, you need to approve the annual budget, the annual audit report, the finance reports, and the local business plan. The local business plan is actually done every 3 years, so you haven't had to look at that, I think, in about a year and a half. Your other primary responsibility is to appoint and evaluate the CEO. You don't just appoint them and let them go off. You have to evaluate them once a year. You have to develop and approve bylaws. And what I think is critical is that you are overseeing compliance, quality, and performance. Yvonne French, who is our DMH liaison, and she comes to these meetings. She's not here this month. She can't make it every time, but she attends our regulatory compliance and quality committee when she's here. And she has told me that we have the far and away the most robust, sharing of information committee where we are not trying to hide anything. If you all want information, all you have to do is ask. There's nothing that we will not share with you if in terms of our performance, our data, what's going on with the organization, finances, services, service gaps, all of that information. We are not trying to hide any of that.
And board members can sit in on any of these meetings they want.
Absolutely.
So that's.
Executive committee, finance committee, regulatory compliance and quality, whether you have been appointed to that committee or not, they're open to the public. Jerry's there. Jerry's at all these committees.
117 pages you have to review.
Yeah, read the material before you go.
And I do have to shout out here to Dr. Khan and Mr. Kennedy, who actually do read all the huge amounts, and Jeannie, who read everything we send them and come to this meeting prepared. I can tell they're prepared because they're like, yes, on slide 27, this third bullet point, I had a question here about what that meant. So they've actually read it before they even get there. What are your powers? Well, you have the authority to borrow money. You have the authority to buy property. The authority to contract to provide services to other governmental or private entities. Although, as we learned last year at board training, it still has to meet the constitutional public purpose test. Whatever it is we're doing has to be for the public good because we're a governmental entity. And then you have the authority to subcontract out any of those LME functions. Some of the duties are to prepare and submit reports that assess the quality and availability of public services within the catchment area. That's really our annual gaps analysis. And Tommy Duncan came a couple of months ago and presented that to you all. He presents that to the CFAC as well. And this is, it's like a 6-month project every year to really pull together all of the information about the availability of services, where we have gaps, and how we're planning to address those gaps. We have to perform public relations and community advocacy functions. I do like to emphasize that because sometimes we get questions about, why do you have PR people? Well, it's actually written into the statute that we are supposed to be providing public relations functions, and the reason for that is to help reduce stigma across our 23 counties. So if you're driving around, you will occasionally see a Vaya billboard, you might hear a Vaya radio ad, and all of those are part of our public relations and community advocacy functions. To get the message out, first of all, that we have a 24/7 call center, and if you're in trouble, you can call us, but also just to get out information in general about mental health, IDD, and SU services and treatment.
That's a pretty broad definition on that community advocacy function, isn't it?
It is. There's not a lot of specificity, but it is a requirement.
And that would include Brian's time at the legislature too.
Oh, absolutely.
It's adult education. I don't know how I classify it.
Obviously, we have to maintain a 24-hour day, 7-day a week crisis response service, and we truly do. I don't think, obviously you guys know we have a call center, but Christina and I, it is not unusual for us to get a call from the senior director of our call center saying, hey, we've got this issue, it might be Saturday, it might be Sunday. They are constantly working to respond to crisis needs of clients in our catchment area.
And their response times are incredible, and the warm pass off there's some really good stuff going on.
Yep, we have really good data and numbers on that. We have to ensure the provision of services to clients in the catchment area with an emphasis on collaboration and coordination for criminal justice clients. And Rhonda couldn't be here today, but I know that is one of the things that our care coordination department has really worked hard on. We have excellent relationships with our DJJs across our 23 counties. I know a couple of years ago we shared with you a really nice email, and I'm trying to remember her name, Christina, Diane? I can't remember what, from out west, who had written an email just really praising our care coordination department and all the improvements she had seen in the collaboration with DJJ as a result of our care coordination philosophy. And then we have to comply with federal requirements as a condition of receipt of federal grants. So some of the functions of LMEs, again, I'm not going to tell you the statute is great. It's not great. 122C is really badly written. It hasn't been updated properly in decades. It's got a lot of duplication. But this is what it says about the functions of LMEs: that we're responsible for the management and oversight of the public system of mental health, developmental disabilities and substance abuse services at the community level. You have to plan, develop, implement, and monitor services within a specified geographic area to ensure expected outcomes for consumers within available resources. And those last three words are kind of key there, right? Within available resources. And as you all know, those available resources keep becoming less available every year. Our primary functions are listed in 115.4B. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can see them up there, but it kind of fleshes out a little more some of the ones on the previous slide. But you'll notice that's the bullet second to the bottom, financial management and accountability for use of public funds. That is a critical one, and that is probably the one that tripped up our partner over in Mecklenburg County. Your responsibilities as board members, you have to attend board meetings. You need to report any conflicts. You have to comply with your code of ethics that's written into your bylaws. You should not disclose confidential information that is shared with you during closed session. You need to read the bylaws, understand them, and read the materials that we provide to you. Ask questions. Cannot emphasize that enough. You should never, ever hesitate to ask any of us questions. You should feel free to call anytime, to call Brian, to call me, to call Christina, to talk to Jay. You know, I don't want you to accept management representations at face value. I want you to always, you know, take your responsibilities as board members very seriously and to feel confident and comfortable to ask questions at any time. And then you have to participate in the annual training. You do. Yes, yes, Nancy, you do. Thank you. And so when we talk about the code of ethics, you know, kind of what is it we're talking about? I did this actually with our call staff at our compliance week. Why do we care about ethics in the business world? Why is that important? Well, it helps create what we think of as long-lasting positive effects to the organization. There have been a lot of studies on this that the higher the level of ethics in an organization, the more productivity and better overall employee morale that you will have. It also improves your ability to attract and retain highly talented individuals. And we've talked about all the challenges we face with competition from other organizations. And one of the things that's going to be key when you have talented individuals who can work anywhere they want to work, you know, I don't know about, I can't speak for others, but I want to work for an ethical organization, right? I don't want to work for Cardinal Innovations, even though they could apparently pay me $750,000, but I don't want to work there because that would impact my reputation, right? And so an ethical organization is going to be able to attract ethical employees. It maintains a positive reputation within our community, and this is critical for us across our 23 counties. You know, we have always got to respond and work on building that reputation. And it builds a stronger bond between our employees and furthers the stability of the organization. So what is your code of ethics? Oh, what happened to the code of ethics? I had a slide on code of ethics. Where'd it go? All right. It probably got moved. We'll find it. I'll come back to that, but your conflict of interest overview, because that's one of the pieces of your code of ethics, is that you have to disclose any actual potential or perceived conflicts of interest that could arise as active members of your communities. This would refer to conflicts related to members, stakeholders, or anyone that does business with Vaya, and it's both the fact and the appearance of a conflict of interest that must be avoided. And so what is a conflict? We've defined that as it can occur if any board member's outside activities, personal financial interests, or other personal interests of influence or appear to influence his or her ability to make objective, unbiased decisions in the course of their membership. And it's an actual conflict again, or it could be perceived by individuals in the community as a conflict. And our procedure is you have an affirmative duty to disclose. I always ask at every board meeting, but you should have told me before the board meeting started. You should self-recuse if you believe that any subject that's being discussed by the board or vote or decision that you have a potential conflict, and the board determines whether or not it is a conflict and how to respond to that. It's a standing agenda item. We do this at every board meeting. I have a list of all of the individuals and entities that we do business with available for you if at any point in time you had a question about whether or not something was a conflict. And a violation of our conflict of interest procedure is grounds for removal from the board. One of the things you do need to know is around member rights and responsibilities. You, as the board, are responsible for overseeing the Human Rights Committee. The Human Rights Committee reports up to this board, and they're responsible for hearing complaints about rights violations. Our members have the right to voice complaints or file a grievance about Vaya or about the care and treatment they receive from Vaya providers. They have the right to receive written notifications from us about adverse benefit determinations. That's where when we say, nope, you can't have that service you asked for, because we don't believe it's medically necessary. They have the right to file an appeal anytime we do issue an adverse benefit determination, and to request a state fair hearing of Vaya's final decision. And again, these are not good things. These are their rights. They have an absolute right to do all of these things. So in terms of compliance and a compliance overview, the board has the ultimate responsibility for the compliance of this organization. It's my job, but ultimately it's your responsibility as board members. The bylaws allow me to directly report compliance issues to you. I've never had to do that. I've never had to go around Brian and say I need to call a special board meeting because there's things happening at the executive level I need to make you aware of. But our bylaws are written in such a way that I could do that. I think that was probably also an issue with Cardinal Innovations, was that their compliance officer apparently did not have the ability to do that. And the board, in your bylaws and in our compliance plan, you can hire an independent investigator or outside counsel at any point in time. If you feel that there's something going on with the organization you want more information about, and you don't want it to be investigated by management, you have the right at any point in time to say, we're going to hire outside counsel, we're going to get an independent auditing firm. We believe that we have an effective compliance program that addresses and incorporates all of the Office of Inspector General guidelines. That compliance program is approved by this board every year. It's presented to the Regulatory Compliance and Quality Committee first, and then it is brought to this board as a recommendation for approval. So you get a copy of that every year. Why do we have a compliance program? Why do we care about it? Well, we have it because it's a requirement. It's not optional. It's in the federal law in 42 CFR Part 438. It's also written into our contract with DMA at Section 14. But the real reasons are because we manage public dollars. We manage, what is it, Clark, 450 million roughly every year? That's a lot of public dollars. And every one of those dollars is public. I always emphasize that with our staff, that it's not like there's this pile of money that's not public and then the rest of it is public. No, it's all taxpayer dollars, each and every dollar that we spend. We maintain a lot of sensitive information. It really shouldn't say 500 plus because we don't have 500 plus anymore. What are we up to now? 480% employees. And so when you have that many employees, you need to have a compliance program. We have, I think, 19 offices. You've got to have a policies and procedures and a program in place if you're going to be managing almost 500 people across 19 offices. And then this is a big one. Not that I really, really hope this never becomes an issue for us, but the federal sentencing guidelines reduce penalties in terms of criminal sentences and fines if the organization has an effective compliance program in place. So that's the carrot for the stick.
Before it came to worse, at least Tracy would have a reduced sentence.
That's right.
He looks good in orange.
I do not look good in orange, and we don't have time for me to do the full thing I do for Compliance Week for our staff, but I try to make it fun for them, and I had a lot of case examples for them this year, and one of my favorite case examples was actually managed care program WellCare in Florida. Their general counsel lied to the feds during an audit and eventually pled guilty and was sentenced recently to 3 years in prison for that. And so I put that slide up there with actually saying orange is not the new black. And I do not look good in orange. I'm not lying for any one of you, for anyone in the organization. But yeah, so I try to make it fun for them, and we do all that. So what are some of the risks for us this year? Compliance risks for us. Well, obviously, it's always a risk that we would fail to meet some DHHS requirements, UREC requirements, federal requirements. A poor state audit. That is kind of what started. It was like the little snowball that became this gigantic thing for Cardinal, right? They had, the state audit that came out. Beth Wood went out and audited them and said, there's areas in which you're not in compliance, and that got a lot of press and it got a lot of attention, and it just kind of built and built and built. A data breach. And in the past, we've brought you lots of information about this. I'm not doing that today, just in the interest of time. But a data breach remains one of the biggest risks. I can tell you it is something we take incredibly seriously. We have huge amounts of protected health information, of personally identifiable information that we are responsible for. And it's not like it's something where you're ever good enough, right? Because as we are ramping up our security procedures, the hackers out there are ramping up all their attempts to intrude into our system. We work with an outside agency called Clearwater Compliance. They're based in Tennessee. A really great organization that we've been working with for a couple of years to just continually improve our security protocols, our information security protocols. But there have been just, there continue to be huge breaches. One of the things we really focused on with our staff this year, so again, I try to make it fun for staff. Every year we have a privacy and security slogan, a little catchphrase that they have to remember. What was our first one was a Smokey the Bear themed one, and it was only you can prevent a breach. Our second one, our second one was from Lord of the Rings. Anybody with kids, grandkids, Lord of the Rings fans? It was keep it secret, keep it safe, which is a quote from that book. And then this year we went with loose clicks sink ships, because what we are finding is that one of the biggest ways hackers attempt to get into your organization is to send spoof emails, phishing emails, and try to lure your staff to click on a link that immediately corrupts your system. And I think all of us in this field are very familiar with this. So we do a ton of training on this topic with our staff. We actually changed our whole email system. So any email that comes from outside of the organization is a gigantic red bar across the top that says, this email originated outside of Vaya Health. Don't click on any links unless you know the sender and trust the information. So we're constantly working on all those kinds of things to try and beef up our security protocols.
A fair amount of them are directed at me.
Oh, yeah.
It's called spear phishing, where they learn enough about your operation,
Same thing happened to us.
understand how things work. They spoof my email and send it to, like I'm sure you remember Debbie Estes, the HR gal for 20-some years. She got an email she thought was from me asking for all the W-2 forms of all the employees. And she's thinking, now that doesn't really seem right, Ryan. Did you really want this? And I look at it and, no, I didn't send that to you, Debbie. There's things like that. Or, release of funds.
And they pick up other friends' names and send it in to people, in the name of people you already have on your list too, so.
Oh yeah, one of the saddest things, Brian and I and several other staff over the past few months have been receiving regular emails from Lisa Slusher. Which obviously those are not real emails. So it's it's just a constant ongoing thing. This is just part of the cost of doing business as a health organization in today's environment. Another risk for us, Brian talked to you about, potentially there's going to be a readiness review like we had, in the past. If the state goes down the route of a tailored plan readiness review, that's a risk for us, that our compliance would not be good enough for us to meet that. Fraud, waste, and abuse is a constant risk for the organization. I spent a lot of time with staff going through all of the fun cases this year with fraudulent providers. Probably the most important one is the one that you guys are already familiar with, Joseph Corzelius, who was the local fellow, the school guidance counselor from Tryon, who defrauded Vaya of a little over $400,000. I did attend his sentencing hearing after our last board meeting and presented our victim statement to the federal judge, and he received 24 months in prison, which
Where
was...
was that at, prison?
I'm sorry?
Where was it at?
Where was he at? He was in Tryon. He was a Tryon Elementary School guidance counselor. So fraud, waste, and abuse remains a constant risk for us.
But no recuperation of those funds?
Well, it's actually very interesting. So, you know, I went to the hearing and made the victim statement. And, you know, his attorney was asking for 6 months, which was a deviation from the federal sentencing guidelines. The maximum was 30 months. The judge gave him 24 months. And it's all based on how much money is involved. And I know $450,000 sounds like a lot of money to us, but in the overall scheme of Medicaid fraud, it's really not a huge amount. But they have seized all of his property. He owned 2 properties, so those will be sold, and those proceeds will come back to Vaya. And then for the rest of his life, he will be making monthly payments to Vaya
After he gets out of jail.
after he gets out of jail. And then there's some litigation risks in general that you all should be aware of. Disability Rights continues to file class action lawsuits against the state of North Carolina, several of which involve behavioral health services, LME, MCOs. They are currently alleging that the department is not in compliance with the settlement agreement in the LS versus Vosh case, which involved innovations. And so we will most likely get pulled into that. So we always have those litigation risks as well. So how are we addressing all of these risks? Well, we have the Regulatory Compliance Committee. We have an internal compliance committee and we have one at the board level. Through training, we do constant training with staff. We do a compliance week where everybody actually leaves the building and goes somewhere, and we talk about compliance issues for a couple of days. Ethics Point, which is our online portal for staff and people outside of the organization to report concerns anonymously. And they can do this in a variety of ways. There's a toll-free hotline people can call, or they can log into the Ethics Point system and file a complaint. We get complaints about providers that way, we get HR complaints that way, we get all kinds of information that way. So this has been a really good tool for us to get a feel for the pulse of the organization. Internal controls that Clark talked about, particularly in the finance department. Internal audits. This has been something new for the organization. We started those last year. We've been doing internal audits. We've done HR file audit. We've done audits of the credentialing team, the grievance and complaints team. And the point of that is, and the way we try to describe it to staff is, we're trying to find problems before an external auditor identifies them, right? We want to find them and fix them before someone else says, hey, you're not doing this right. Performance dashboards, all of the data that we bring both to the executive leadership team and to the board. Clearwater compliance, I mentioned to you before. We've purchased cyber liability insurance, which is probably our biggest defense on the security breach issue. And then all of our provider monitoring, which Jeannie will probably tell you we do too much provider monitoring, but a lot of it is just mandated by the state. But we do a lot of provider monitoring, and all of that is designed both on quality, but also to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse of public funds. So looking forward from a compliance perspective, what are the things that you should kind of be perking your ears up about? What you be thinking about? The super measures is a big one. So the super measures, we keep what we call a project prioritization list, our portfolio in the organization, where we are ranking the projects that we're working on in terms of importance for the organization. Super measures is our #1 project. And the reason for that is because the risk of not meeting the super measures is a huge financial hit for the organization. It's a $450,000 a month fine from the Department of Health and Human Services. So the super measures, I know Billy has come and talked to you about those before, but just in general, it's a TCLI housing measure that we're currently meeting. It's an innovations primary care visit measure that we're currently meeting. And then it's 2 follow-up after discharge measures, and this is saying that 40% of all individuals who are discharged from an inpatient or crisis setting receive a follow-up appointment within 7 days. None of the LMEs across the state are meeting this. And we are all working together, working with the department to try and work on strategies to meet this one. So that's probably one of our biggest projects right now. URAC reaccreditation, we're up for reaccreditation. All of our documents are due to URAC in March. I mentioned to you that the state auditor, Beth Wood, has indicated publicly her intent to do a year-long audit of LME MCOs, so we are anticipating that. Human resources, that's been something we are working on. The executive leadership team has developed an HR strategic plan. And then the readiness review I mentioned, and then any risks associated with our work with the coalition. I don't know, Brian, if you can think of anything else.
Just for your information, Macon County is doing the 7-day follow-up. we are doing that through EMS. Our good friends at Evergreen Foundation, I approached them, but they couldn't give us the money quick enough for some reason. And so when they come out of the hospital, the problem we're having is there was a hip removed. But we are, the EMS, we designated 2 EMS workers and first responders to go and follow up with these folks as they come out with a pamphlet. No transportation, no money.
Yeah, transportation is one of the biggest barriers, and the other issue is that it's part of what we've been working with the department is how they're defining what qualifies as a follow-up. So I can tell you, for example, when they first issued the measure specifications, they said peer support, that doesn't count. Well, that was kind of contrary to everything the department had been working on for years, and certainly contrary to our model, which is very much a peer support model, and we encourage peer support, and it's a billable service. And they said, nope, that service doesn't count. So that's been something we've really been working with. So they've now agreed it will count, you're like this, it will count for state funding, but it won't count for Medicaid yet. So we're continuing to work on the Medicaid side, but that's some of the issues we're working on, is trying to really clarify, well, what does follow-up mean, right? Does follow-up mean they actually have to go to, to the RHA office and meet with a therapist, or is there other things that count as follow-up? Because there are a lot of barriers to this population, and as Ronnie mentioned, transportation is one of the biggest across our catchment area. Any other? Yes.
Your slide about conflict of interest said personal conflict of interest. How far does my personality extend? I mean, I have a relationship with the hospital board. I have a daughter who's in mental health services. I have, not with Vaya. I have friends.
Friends know, and it's really part of it is your judgment as a board member as to whether you believe it improperly influences your ability to make objective, unbiased decisions on behalf of the board. I can give you an example. Ronnie came to me a few months ago and let me know that his daughter had gotten a job with the Department of Health and Human Services. And he told me about the job, and we looked at it. It's I looked at the contract. The contract was very specific, had to do with DHHS decision-making authority around us is now in the MCO, so that's not a conflict because of what his daughter was doing. So if you have any concern about whether or not you have a conflict, all you have to do is ask.
If it doesn't dawn on you until you see something that's a funding item or something like that that has to do with services, for instance, that might be at my hospital.
Sure, you could always self-recuse.
Self-recuse at that point,
Yep.
rather than disclose. Okay.
Yep.
Tracy, what if you volunteer for someone that Vaya is connected with? Is that a conflict?
Probably not, but we can always talk about it.
Okay, because I hadn't thought about that.
But if you're not receiving money from them, then it's most likely not a conflict. Like Billy serves on, what's the hospital board you serve on?
Appalachian Regional Healthcare.
Yeah, and we determined that that was not a conflict.
And the county commission, that shouldn't be a conflict either, if you're looking for the doctor to get upset. You never know that.
Right.
It does influence my decisions.
Right. We try to be reasonable.
I mean, that's
So-
why we have county managers on this.
That's right.
So they can represent the interests of their, of their
Yeah.
local. So it's an immediate conflict.
Somehow my code of ethics slide disappeared, I'm not sure, but I'm gonna sum it up for you. Rick French actually summed it up for me last year. He's not gonna remember this, but I remember it forever. So per Rick French, your code of conduct is no fistfights. So as long as y'all don't get into any fistfights, I think we're good. But in general, it's about treating each other with respect, maintaining confidentiality, etc. And it's in your bylaws. I'm going to close with this quote that I like to use, and just as a reminder, that Medicaid is hard. Again, we are never going to be a perfect organization. There are things that we're going to miss. This is one of my very favorite quotes from a judge. The Medicaid statute is an aggravated assault on the English language, resistant to attempts to understand it. The statute is complicated and murky, not only difficult to administer and to interpret, but a poor example to those who would like to use plain and simple expressions. And that was actually back in 1976, and I can tell you that the Medicaid statute has not gotten simpler or better since that time. So we do the very best that we can, but Medicaid is hard, and I'm not going to promise you that we won't ever have issues. if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Yeah.
I have just a question that has to do with the sharing of information. I think you've done a great job at helping us to understand, or helping me as a new board member to see and understand the things that you're doing, from sharing of information, making sure that you're held accountable, that the organization meets the standards set by the statute and goes above and beyond doing that. One of the things that I just really, and you know, the saying, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So, you know, from I guess my experience where I am, I would, I still don't quite understand for our board meetings why we don't post the information about the board meetings, the agenda, the minutes, the attachments, why we don't post that as an opportunity to share that we are accountable as both a board and as an organization to the people that we serve, why we don't have that information out on the website. I don't really understand that.
Sure. It's really a decision for this board, but the statute does not require it. And so that was really why it's not there. It's not a requirement of the statute. The statute requires that for open meetings, that you notify the public of what your meeting schedule is. If your meeting schedule changes, that you notify the public in a reasonable time in advance of that meeting change. That if you're going to have an emergency meeting, you notify them of the emergency meeting.
Sure, and I think that that's, I wouldn't disagree with you at all on that. I think the only question that I would have is there's so many things that you're doing that are above and beyond what is required in statute, that are good things and are what I would think a reasonable person would expect. So that's why if it's the board's decision, then I would like to be able to have that discussion as a board as to why we don't share that information. There's a lot of great information here, and we should be willing, if we're willing to have a discussion in an open meeting, we should be willing to defend that information and to provide that information and to support that information.
Yeah, it really, again, it's really up to the board.
I think there were some logistical issues on the agenda side, weren't there?
It's another task. It's something that somebody else has to do and maintain and keep up with. And part of it was when we moved to our new website. This was when the change happened. Was when we moved to our new website, and our what we found with our old website was that it had become sort of, for lack of a better term, a dumping ground for information. We got a lot of complaints from members and families that there was so much stuff on the website they couldn't find anything. And it's, so it just becomes another task for someone else to have to keep up with the website, make sure that the information is current, make sure that we don't, that it hasn't become sort of the documentation library for the entire organization. And so that's really when the change happened, was when we switched to the new website.
I think that's an excellent point, and again, glass houses. We've experienced exactly the same thing and realized that you have to have those resources to be able to do that. I think the other side of that coin is you don't have to send an email with all the attachments, and you don't have to do that. Here's the link. Here's where the board meeting is. All your information will be found there. And so I would just encourage the board to consider that just as another example of being completely transparent and proud of the work that y'all are doing and that we're doing as a board.
Well, it's a PR opportunity too, like you say, that we believe we're doing the best we can, and why don't we share that? I'm wondering if the PR department ought to look into this as far as how much it would be involved and what the best procedure is to, just as part of showing that Vaya is a good organization. So, I don't know.
That's under me, so I'll just go ahead and answer that for you. Can we do it? Absolutely, can we do it? Can we do it this week or today? No, we can't. I've lost my board clerk because she went to work for mission. So I think she called most of you to let you know she had accepted that opportunity. And in addition to supporting me, Ryan supported our PR department and helped with all that work. So I've just got 2 people right now. We have 1 lady who works on our website. So it would just be another task for that person. So can we do it? Yes. Can we do it right now? No. From a resource perspective.
Tracy? What do you think would be possible once you get fully staffed?
Once we would hire a new clerk and get that person up to speed.
Can we put that on agenda for next board meeting? This is not a board.
Can we do that?
Absolutely. Put that on as something to vote on at the next board meeting.
Yes.
Give y'all time to think about it.
Tracy, there's no rules or regulations that this board cannot call a closed session with board members only, no staff in the room.
Oh, you can always do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
We do
can.
that on the pay stuff, don't we? Yeah.
You can have a closed session for any one of the reasons enumerated in General Statute
I just think that's
143.
healthy. I think it brings the board closer together. Every board that I serve on, we, like the bank board and even in the county, you know, we have that often. And I think because you hear voices, people voice things that would not voice with Brian Ingram sitting in the room, good or bad. And of course, you always dump it on the chairman. But I just think that really should become part of our meetings. That and it may not be nothing. No board member may have anything, but yet somebody may have something they don't want to share with the staff in the room.
But it's got to fit under one of the categories of closed session.
Oh yeah.
It does.
Agenda.
It does.
It does.
It certainly should be part of your annual evaluation of the CEO is that you should be meeting without him to do that evaluation. You should also feel free to meet with other people who work for Vaya who are not us, or to meet with Christina by herself. You know, again, it's really you as the board have that authority. You should not ever feel like we're saying you can only meet with us as a group or with Brian. That's not what we're
And it
saying.
may be attorney-client privilege that we meet
Correct.
under.
Well, I understand that, but I do think there's I think the board needs to oversee, but not micromanage. So when you get down into micromanaging, then that's really the staff and executive's job. And we're supposed to be oversight and vision and compliance. So, I take our responsibility seriously, but don't want to overgo onto the management side, which is really not our role, except for when there's a problem or something.
That's not necessarily true.
Say that.
The role of the board is for oversight, but if you go back 41 slides, whatever it was, you'll see in there where it says part of the board responsibility is we run the show
Yeah.
of everything,
Yeah.
not just compliance, not just
When we
oversight.
vote on those things, we're making that.
That's
call.
right.
Yeah.
So I just think it's healthy vote in a lot of cases.
Absolutely.
Tracy, is the information available by request?
Oh, absolutely.
That's what I thought. You know, I agree with everything that was said, but a lot of the information that we are presented is pretty complicated stuff that, average person's not gonna understand a lot of it without explanation. And so I would think if we're gonna post all that stuff, maybe more explanation would be. I would think the average person doesn't know what a Medicaid defense interval is. And, those kinds of things. And even when we look at the QA reports, there's
so much information
there's
in there,
so
and you really
much.
need to dig deep and ask those questions. And I've been doing this for 5 years and it's still working on it, so.
Yeah, but that doesn't, well, we'll discuss it. Maybe next board meeting, but it doesn't preclude offering that information if people can
Yeah.
understand it, they can
And want
ask
to dig.
questions, or they can say, well, this is not helpful to me.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a very healthy discussion. I think this is a sign of a healthy board that you're having this discussion.
Oh, gotcha.
Any other questions? Donald is here now, and so I think we're gonna transition to our substance use presentation. Brian, you ready for that?
You know you want to spend it with us.
We've been waiting for you.
Ronnie is telling me that I look good in stripes. I will not look good in stripes. It's not funny. But anyway, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
PowerPoint. I think it's got my PowerPoint in there.
This could save a life?
No.
time to check out here.
11.
11 o'clock.
But
Yeah, can we take a break?
Yeah, just a quick, or we just can step outside.
I don't see it on there.
I think you should stay in there.
Where's the PowerPoint of the LOC presentation?
I don't know what they
She
call
told me
that,
that it was
lavish
on here.
retreat.
Yeah.
Lavish retreat. Our lavish retreat has been the hot tub.
I got it.
I don't want to do anything unethical.
Let me
help you?
Did I shoot it over to you? I'm gonna get fresh.
Christmas basket with big old boxes and little.
Unless it's.
And sometimes we get them the next year.
Yeah.
They
recycle.
We recycle, we don't waste anything.
That's right.
You didn't get the memo, it's a retreat.
I know, it's like a casual day.
We were a little busy last night, but it's a workshop today.
Brian, Ronnie, and I got Ronnie, you got the email from Kevin Leonard, didn't you, about the board meeting?
Yes.
Dave Richards coming. We've got our board meeting on the 6th, and he's coming to give us kind of a pretty comprehensive update on Medicaid transformation, update on plans to transform the Medicaid structure in North Carolina over the next few years. So we'll be here.
And David's asked me to do a little thing about the Medicaid reform
Yeah.
proposals that how it affects rural counties, that most of us sitting around the table are,
Yeah, about 70%.
and it really hurts us.
Brian, do we want to give them a break to check out
Sure.
while you get everything set up?
If you want to.
Now we're at
Yeah,
a
we got it.
finish home. Is this 30 minutes?
Okay, if you need to check out, take a quick break.
Do it now?
Do it now.
Okay.
Do it now.
Take a 15-minute break, come back at 10, then we'll get
Thank you.
started.
You gotta come back, I'm sorry.
Our slowness first, but back.
So,
He was out there harassing the staff, I saw it.
Okay.
this is a present, I was invited by, actually Steve Owens, and I think he was just a messenger, and a joint legislative oversight committee on health and human services to present about, I think really the category of it was as much about good things that LME MCOs are doing, since oftentimes the conversations are less positive. So he, probably the department said, yeah, why don't you give Ryan a call? They've been doing a lot of great stuff around opioid use and, our Substance Use Alliance and all of that. So this was a PowerPoint presentation I put together. Got a lot of help from Donald and some of his folks, and I want to make sure, does everybody know Donald? I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
We know.
We got a lot of help from him and some of his folks, and did this presentation for that committee. The way I started this was to, I guess, really get people's attention with how significant a problem this is. And, the department has had some public service announcements and whatnot recently. You've probably seen them on TV. I mean, the cold, hard reality is, depending on how you count, I know that may seem unusual, but there are some differences in the way people look at, technically it's poisonings related to drug overdoses. Between 3 and 5 people a day in North Carolina die from some drug overdose. Now that doesn't just about take your breath away. I don't know what will. I mean, it's the one thing that's different about this, and I remember last night a couple times we got really close to saying this. The silver lining in this is because so many people that are middle class and white, I guess for lack of a better way to describe it, are dying. It's provided a lot more conversation. It is not about someone else. I mean, I bet you every one of you in here knows of a family member, a member of your community, someone from work that has either had a serious overdose or died as a result of this. We've had family members and employees. I went to one of the funerals. Okay, this isn't about someone else. It is not about other people. Okay, this is about your families, your communities, people you know, and people you work with. And we are in a massive game of catch-up because this thing has gotten such an enormous head start, and that's really what the first part of this is. And it's such a huge problem. There's not going to be just an answer to it. So let me just go quickly through the first part. Yes, Pat?
I want to ask you a question. Some of you may know I had a surgery in August when I was in the hospital I didn't need. And I've been having to see a specialist due to some side effects from this surgery. And I went to the doctor twice this week. And I don't know how I left the doctor's office not knowing this, but it took me talking to my best friend who's a nurse saying, well, they put me on this. And she said, do you know that's an opioid? And I did not know. So, and I'm still trying to figure out now, oh my God, do I want to take what they have put me on probably long term? That I left the doctor's office, and as involved as I am in all this, I did not know till the nurse, that's a friend of mine, that I was having a conversation with, told me that's an opioid. People got to be better informed when they leave their doctor's offices, because, you know, now I'm in a panic situation, like trying to weigh the pros and cons of it, but, you know, we've got to do a better job. Doctor's office has got to do a better job of saying, this is what I'm putting you on, and this is what it is, and you need to know what can happen. So
hopefully we'll be able to talk to some of those elements here when we get into the section about what we're doing. Thanks for sharing that. So, what do we mean by the opioid crisis? Prescriptions, right? Now, just try to get your brain wrapped around it. For every 100 North Carolina citizens, there's 83 opioid prescriptions. And as bad as that is, you see that down arrow there? It's getting better. In 2012, the peak was 97 per 100 prescriptions for opioids. Wow. Now, there is no reasonable way to accept or understand that, is there? I mean, it's just the flooding of prescriptions for opioids. And what's the basis for that? I think, you know, everybody kind of knows the story of, you know, how pain became the fifth vital sign, and it was important to treat pain. And along came pharmaceutical companies. They said, oh, we have these great things, and by the way, they're not addictive. And they were wrong. I mean, they're just wrong. But it's like, you know, spilling gasoline and it gets on fire, you know, because you thought you had something that wasn't flammable. Well, you know, once that fire's burning, it's going to take a long time to get it out. So, is it getting better? It's getting better. It's still off the chart bad. 675 million pills. I mean, it's almost so enormous you can't even conceive of it.
And you can get your county breakdown if you're interested.
Yeah, there's a website that's interactive with all the county stuff.
Brian, when doctors are prescribing these, do they have to prescribe like a set number, like to get the insurance company, like for me, I want 1, I get 30. Is it that they have to do it at am I asking the question?
We have 2 physicians here that can respond to that.
You don't have to, but most of the time prescriptions are done that way for economics. So, and how we anticipate if somebody will be on medication for more than a couple of days. But, yeah, more attention needs to be paid to that amount.
Yeah.
Amount.
Okay.
I think sort of traditionally, there's been a tendency to overprescribe, so you don't have to call back and the doctor doesn't have to fill out another prescription. But of course, with the STOP Act and all the education that's going out, we hope that'll go down.
So of course, because the number of prescriptions are down relative to the high point, the number of pills is actually down. As you can imagine, 675 million is smaller than the previous number. And, you know, for the purposes of my presentation, you know, some of it was statewide data, and I tried to, you know, kind of bring it down to what we have in our catchment area, 94 million pills. And we're a little bit per capita, you know, there's more pills per capita than population, if you follow me. And again, it's down. Prescriptions are down, pills are down, but still a huge number. Now, wouldn't you think that because prescriptions are actually down, as bad as it is, number of pills are down, number of prescriptions are down, but guess what? The number of, and again, here we see this term poisoning deaths, it's actually up to 1,965 in 2016. And you're going to understand why here in a minute. The asterisk there, that number of 1,518 involving opiates, so of the 1,900, 1,500 of them involved opiates, but look at what that little asterisk, what that number includes. Opioid pills, carfentanil, fentanyl, and heroin. Everybody knows what heroin is. Everybody know what fentanyl is?
100 times stronger.
Everybody know what carfentanil is?
Stronger than fentanyl.
Elephant tranquilizer. Yeah, that's the one that is actually 100 times stronger than a dose of fentanyl typically. Fentanyl is typically 10 times stronger than a dose of heroin.
Just to give you an idea, they just arrested a nurse in Memorial Mission for stealing the liquid fentanyl.
When you're talking about elephant tranquilizers, where in the world would people have access to the elephant
Comes from
tranquilizer?
China, most of it, through Mexico.
Black market.
It's cheap.
So, yeah, so you really get the, I mean, poisoning is the right word, isn't it?
Most drug dealers are not very good chemists.
It is, people are poisoning themselves with incredibly strong compounds and, you know, say medications or quasi-medications. So while the number of opiate pills is actually down because of fentanyl, carfentanil, and heroin, the deaths are actually up. So if you were to break that 15, 18 apart, you know, again, you'd see the opioid pills as less, but the others have increased so much that it's increased the net. And of course, heroin, you know, is a big, huge thing now too. People, in some cases, people find it easier to get heroin than pills, and in some ways cheaper. So even though we've done, you know, we've made progress on the opiates, the fentanyl, carfentanil, and heroin is more than made up for the progress we made on the opioid pills.
Just 552, close to 10, 18.
Yes.
And that brings people into the criminal side of it too, and as well, as opposed to the pills. When they look for that heroin, they're going out of their normal circle.
When you hear the death of overdose of heroin, they flood that area. They want that drug. Whatever they overdosed on, they want it.
So you can see something that is this big, there is no you know, silver bullet, so to speak, in terms of solving the problem, because it's a collection of problems that have been going on for a long time. And the only thing that works with it, this is like public health, right? You know, when the country decided that smoking cigarettes was bad, or that cardiovascular disease was something important they need to do something about. I mean, it takes years of effort of just, you know, a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of willpower to make changes in all the systems where change needs to occur. So what do we do about it? You know, obviously we have an enormous stake in this, and we took advantage of our big footprint and our relationships and said, you know, who are all the important stakeholders that we want to get in a room to talk about this? And this was, in broad brush, the range of folks that showed up when we asked to pull key stakeholders from the community together and essentially formed this Western North Carolina Substance Use Alliance. When we did, I think Donald's folks did this, or Jesse or someone, you know, we looked at, you know, kind of what is going on out there. And there was something like 32 or 35 groups in our 23 counties that were meeting that had something to do with this, which is good. I mean, here's the good part about it. A lot of times, at that grassroots level, things can be very effective. And we'll give you some examples later on when we get to that. But if those groups are not connected in any way, and there isn't scale to some of the things they're trying to doing, you know, it can be less efficient and less effective. So what we wanted to do was have the best of both worlds. And we didn't want to step on any of the work that people were doing in communities, but we wanted to provide a venue where activities could be scaled and prioritized and worked on in a regional manner to try to advance a lot of the priorities that people care about. So that was a lot of the, you know, kind of the emphasis of it. You know, there were some good documents out there that addressed, you know, the problems and the solutions and what was being done statewide. You know, with the previous administration, I was on the governor's task force on this, and, you know, we published a great report, and, you know, there's no shortage of information now. I mean, you know, could you go a week without reading something about this? I mean, probably not. So, you know, we decided, you know, again, this is very broad brush, that we would commit ourselves to a catchment-wide, and that's another very important piece with this, and you look at the membership, and we were very conscious of having membership that spanned, you know, our entire region, and we would, you know, put our best effort into creating some sort of a regional plan, and that would be phase one. And then phase two would really be the implementation of the plan. And we just finished phase one. The report was released, you know, sometime here in January. You heard Jeannie talk about the presentation that Tara and folks did with the Provider Advisory Council this last week. So we're kind of at the tail end of the rolling it all out there phase. And there was a meeting of the alliances last week when I was out of the office. And Christina chaired that group, so it was kind of the release of that report, then catching up on what people had done, and then preparing for the implementation of all the great ideas we came up with. Again, pretty straightforward here. Create as much efficiency as we can, scale the right things, look at resources, and try to connect as many of these initiatives as we could. So we organized the work, and I'll tell you, the single biggest problem as we were doing this was keeping the scope from becoming, you know, like solving world hunger, right? I mean, because again, you think of how big this is and how everybody wants to do something, and the something, you know, is might be a little different here or there or whatever, about so many problems and so many issues. It took a lot of force and energy to keep it contained to things that we could reasonably take on. So the organization and the structure to the work was very important. So we built structure into the committees by establishing 4. The first was around medication-assisted treatment. And Dr. Khan, you want to tell us what medication-assisted treatment is?
I'm not sure, but
About Dr. Bunio.
Sure. So there are medications that we can give to people who are entering into recovery. We use Suboxone over in Cherokee, which is buprenorphine with some Narcan in it, so it can't be injected. And so this will bind the receptors, but they won't get high. And people take this, and we started treating them for 3 months or 6 months, but now I think most experts are saying this might need to be a lifelong treatment, just like we treat diabetes.
So this is best practice, period. Evidence-based and best practice. And I guess that maybe the key word there is assisted. This doesn't take the place of more traditional counseling, therapy. It's adjunct to that. So that's a huge advantage that we have. So we have an evidence-based best practice that is available to help people. There's a lot of barriers to using it because there's resistance about the use of medication. Really?
That's what I was gonna ask. Where do people get this Suboxone? We have a methadone clinic in our county, and that there's a lot of pushback against that too.
Against methadone?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
the clinic,
Right.
they saying it draws.
Well, any provider who does, takes on some additional training could prescribe it in their office.
So then they wouldn't have, they could totally take away that stigma of having to go to one place and get there.
But it's a significant barrier though to become a Suboxone prescriber. You have to.
There's a training program that you have to go through. I don't recall how many hours it
It's
is.
about 30, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's insurmountable.
Yeah.
But it's not everybody's.
You can only
And
prescribe
Maytech
so
is
much.
offering it free.
And I think one of the other, barriers is, well, this population, a lot of them are uninsured.
Yeah.
But I don't think any of the, major insurance companies allow this without a pre-authorization of some sort. There's barriers to use it. We don't in Cherokee, but we're a little bit different,
Yeah.
so. I think the standard is, what we would like to see is that every doctor's office would be able to do this, just like every doctor's office could treat diabetes. And some doctors may not be comfortable treating diabetes, so they'll have to refer them somewhere else. It may be the same as this.
Do you think there's a possibility with this transition in Medicaid and it being the whole care package that it might be part of the conversation that this becomes just an adjunct to their mental health through the primary physical care?
Nice.
Well,
Nice dream. I don't.
I mean, the problem,
No.
the
Regulations go away.
yes, except that part of the solution is tiny compared to the fact of what Dr. Bunio said. We haven't expanded Medicaid. Most of these people we're talking about don't have Medicaid.
uninsured.
We don't have the money to pay for it. Here we are again.
And we addressed this on the mental health
They
task
pay
force.
for it
Brian.
themselves?
Oh,
They pay for it themselves?
And they
Theoretical.
will.
If they can.
It's like $15 a day or something. I mean, I'm talking to people.
Methadone is about that.
Methadone.
Methadone is much cheaper than Suboxone.
Is it?
Yeah.
Suboxone is,
Pill itself is
it's,
a medication.
in the, Donald will know, in the $200 to $300 a month. If you're with an FQHC, it can go down to about $85 a month to $100 a month. But if you're poor and you have no insurance, that's may as well be $1 million.
Our argument was that was 2 days in jail
Yeah.
for our local jails. If you put them on, if they're on Suboxone.
Yeah.
That was a non-starter in our task force. Just to find money to help pay for it, because they don't have nothing. Right, brother?
You don't have Medicaid, you are fighting one big uphill battle. I say it over and over and over again. Probably the biggest challenge we have is managing the very small amount of funds for the enormous need there is for the non-Medicaid population. So, women, pregnant women, and it's too bad Jeff Heck isn't here today. Mayheck has been really working hard at developing some combination residential and outpatient treatment options there. Crisis services for adults, and of course, something along the lines of prevention and focusing on youth.
Now, Brian, go back to the pregnancy.
Yeah.
That's 6 out of 10 in Macon County. So we know that for a fact. So we did ask for help, with that. We were denied. It fit the whatever slot put there in. So what's it going to take to make what we need to do locally? And it's in your county, Billy, it's in your county, Gary, it's all of our counties. So what criteria is it going to take for these pregnant ladies that's coming in that we can use state funds or federal funds? Our health departments can't afford it.
So 6 out of 10 babies born in Macon County are born to mothers that are using.
6 out of 10 that walks through there with an unwanted or an unexpected pregnancy are addicted to Macon County.
And then the question is, you criminalize these women and take the child away from them. So there's a whole criminal aspect to this, of this is a disease and why are you being criminalized for a disease? There's cases in Pennsylvania where a woman's looking, there's some really bad cases about the criminal input of criminalizing this disease. And pregnant women are prime examples right now. I think if they test positive, DSS has to take the child away. And it's very, and then right away, the first day, the mother loses their child because of their disease. And so that's a big part of it too.
They don't have to take the child into custody if the child tests positive. It doesn't have to have that. The child does have to have a safety plan.
Right.
And it can include keeping that child with the mother if there are significant safety arrangements to assure the safety
Right,
of
but
that child.
marijuana is still included in that test, I believe. And it says but it puts our DSS in a dangerous position to make that judgment call versus what the state regulations. So you're right on that. But it's something our DSS has dealt with. This mother seems like it's okay, but she tested positive for marijuana. Can we do the safety plan, and is it going to come back on us? So
Do you think there'll be a plan, Brian, for that?
Well, I want to let Donald kind of weigh in here, and again, I wish Dr. Heck was here. Actually, I'm going to meet with him.
Jim's really involved in some things
Okay,
too.
with the, that's going on with Mayhack. These are the priorities. Donald
As far as
and Jim.
the pregnant issue?
Yeah.
I mean, one, it's a huge challenge. One, for what Brian was saying is how much money we have to go around to actually address it. A lot of the CURES money that we're getting from the state right now is targeted towards specific priorities that the state has set aside. And those are the ones that we're having to fill and use the money with. And then there's a general pot of money that everyone can access. That's not a really large pot of money for us. This first part of the year is roughly $700,000 for 23 counties, mainly going towards opioid treatment, so your methadone clinics, your Suboxone prescribers, trying to provide some support for that. So on the pregnant women's side, what we've been trying to do is weave together as many of the local resources that are out there working on that as we can to try to maximize where we have some of that money. Because we know we can use Medicaid for some of the treatment while they have it, but then they lose it. And then what do you do once they lose their Medicaid after that baby's born? So that's been the tricky part on trying to figure out how to do that. While they're pregnant, they can get therapy in our system, and they can get support for methadone clinics and Suboxone prescribers. When they trip off of that, we have a small pot of money that then ongoing treatment. I think what Buncombe's been trying to figure out, as well as us, is how do you do that in a continuum of care, which includes some sort of residential treatment? And the thing is who pays for the residential treatment, right? It's expensive to put somebody into a residence per day, and how many people can you help with those programs? Most of the programs in the state that are able to run those programs now are using significant large amounts of county dollars to prop those programs up. And so that's been our challenge, trying to figure out how we do with that. So in that particular initiative, our main goal is coalition building and connecting the pieces. Because everyone's touching them. MAHEC's working with them, Mission's working with them, we're working with them, but not necessarily in a coordinated
Wouldn't you
fashion.
just go straight to the health department? That's where they all come to, the local health department. Everyone, all of them. I just don't understand why you just don't sit down with the health department, you go to the plan of the health department. They see it all. If you treat the mother, you treat the baby. So, why don't we do that?
Well, it's my understanding those health departments are sitting at the table.
For what?
They're sitting at the table being part of those conversations. Are they not?
I don't think they can find the table.
I think in some places they are, I mean, because there's all these county coalitions. Yeah.
There's nothing in the far west.
I thought that there was a group that was meeting in the far west with,
We made an application, it was denied.
so I'm not sure what application you're referring to when you
For
said.
pregnant women, that's addicted.
Was that an application to us?
That's right.
I'm not sure I've seen that or know exactly what you're talking about. I know that there was a request around embedding therapists in the health department. I know we've supported that.
We got a key on
Yeah. That helps. We can talk afterwards if we want to. I'd be glad to hear.
it. Well, these health departments, they need to know it too. It's the same thing.
Is there money in these FQHCs for this kind of treatment?
There's the FQHCs.
We got approved last year for QHC.
The FQHCs have a little more flexibility to do it. One is because they get some federal funding
Yeah.
to serve uninsured, which is a big deal. They also have 340B pricing in their pharmacies, so they can get these medications at a much cheaper rate. And that's the challenge, right, is that the Suboxone is more expensive, and even Vivitrol out now is even a great option. It's a 30-day injectable, so you don't need a pill. You don't need to go to a clinic every day, but it's expensive. Who's going to pay for it? So that's been, the challenge of it. If you're on Medicaid, some of these are on the Medicaid pharmacy, but they're not. These individuals don't have Medicaid. So the FQHCs are a resource that we've used because they are getting into this business now. They are required in their federal regulations to serve those individuals, and they can do it cheaper than the rest of the system can.
And when you've got somebody that's not on Medicaid, you've got a great nephew, 23 years old, on this stuff, just fell off of a 22-story balcony, landed on a 10-story balcony, and don't know whether he's gonna live or die. And, he's from our catchment area, but down in Florida, now has nothing. I mean, this stuff is just horrible. Sad.
Is there any, is HIPAA, are the HIPAA regulations preventing some of these organizations of sharing information? I'm thinking the health department and the hospital, and I was talking with our captain about the jail, and he was saying that, to coordinate, like when we have a mental health patient we know identified in the jail, and when they come out, do we pick them up there like we pick them up out of a hospital setting or a rehab setting? And he was saying that he's restricted, so he can't share who's there. So we're not, our Daymark can't know that this person's going to be released because they can't let that information out.
That's
But if they
not
sign a
HIPAA.
release, if they
Yeah.
have a release of information, they can, that's the easiest thing in the world to do.
The patient
Yeah,
himself.
I mean, they're sitting there in the jail cell, it'd be pretty easy to get them to.
Well, I'll follow up on that.
Yeah.
We have a.
Well, but I'm actually not sure, just to be clear, that I'm not sure that what he's talking about is HIPAA. That sounds like it's more a criminal justice.
It could be, yeah.
Because HIPAA actually is fairly broad, and it's allowing of the sharing of information for treatment, payment, and healthcare operations. So we were able to share a lot of information for treatment purposes
But not in the
without.
criminal part, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that might actually be a criminal justice.
You have to have
issue.
judges involved.
But with half our inmates having mental health issues, there's a lot of people, mental health in jails is important too. Even though they're confined, it's not as volatile, it's still happening.
We have multiple programs across the region where we're working directly with the jail.
Okay.
Like in Rutherford County, we have a diversion Vivitrol project where they're giving Vivitrol upon discharge from the jail,
Okay.
and it's being continued in the community by the provider.
Okay.
We've had similar conversations in Clay about a program, and in Moncton, we have a fairly robust diversion program, as well as working on one in Transylvania.
Can I just talk just a bit about when the pregnant women come present to the health department or to a clinic like Mayhack or wherever? I think there are options in working with your DSS, because you're right, there's a required reporting element. When a child is delivered and they have a positive toxicology, the hospital is required to report that to DSS. But there are often times, like I use Mayhack as our example for the high risk. That's where many of those women that have substance use disorder are presenting. And DSS legally cannot provide involuntary services until a baby is delivered. But in working with Mayhack, we do have DSS that has social workers, prevention social workers that, with the mother's approval, which many times she's ready to engage, to be able to meet with that mother while she's pregnant, and to be able to work on a safety plan, and be able to work on getting treatment, work on getting those things that need to be done that right now, in many cases, are done after the baby is born, when the mother is not in a good place, and is much more likely, if the baby is removed, to absolutely drop off the radar and go back into true addiction. And in the DSS world, you have 12 months under the federal guidelines to do reunification efforts. If you've lost that mother for 8-9 months, then as she finally comes back in the 9th month of the 12th month, you are almost impossible to get that mother into treatment and in a stable place to be able to have that child replaced or placed back with the mother. So often the only option is adoption or continued languishing in foster care, which nobody wants. So one of the things that's been highly successful is putting a DSS social worker into, you could do a health department if they're the ones seeing those high risk, those mothers.
We use Meridian and DSS.
And you know, the downside to that is there is no money to pay for a prevention social worker unless the county pays for it. So
That was my question.
Yeah, there-
Is the state paying half of that, or whatever percentage they pay?
the only
depending on
thing
classification?
that they could use would be the Medicaid administrative claiming dollars.
Okay.
And I think that would work for a lot of the work that they do, but there's, you have to follow a lot of rules. But
Yeah.
I think, I guess to say, I think it's a challenge with everywhere, but one of the biggest things is trying to figure out what it is that you're going to try to piece together. And that's the biggest challenge, I
But
think.
Jim, don't you agree this is one area we could be proactive instead of reactive?
Oh, I think the proactive part is if we have the ability to influence both at the state and the federal level concerning Medicaid. Of course, we could always say expansion, but if you're able to keep the baby with the mother after she's delivered, it's likely that the mother, who's probably not going to have enough income, is going to qualify for Medicaid and would be able to stay and remain in treatment. The other component of that is, in the reimbursement system under the foster care system, you only get paid for board payments when the child is out of the home. If you could get the state and feds to agree to use some of that foster care board payment money to pay, use that money to pay when you have wraparound services with a mom and her baby together, rather than removing that child and from the mother. Right now, the only way that you're gonna do that is to spend county money to do it. That would be, those two things would be a huge help for counties to be able to address some of those very things. It's not gonna be enough, but it would be a huge, good first step to be able to get that done. And I don't know if that had to be through a waiver application or if that would have to happen at the federal level, but I think that's a very strong and necessary thing if we're gonna attempt to address those things, unless.
Yeah, so that's something a county could do, and I appreciate, I misspoke on that as far as what would happen to a woman, but I appreciate you clarifying all that, because it is pretty tricky, but, so that, I mean, our DSS is asking for another social worker, and that would be a particular place that a county, because we don't have MAHAC, although our hospital is in the ACA with Mission now, so that kind of service would be good if we could expand that, but how many counties is MAHAC in now?
18, I think, or 20?
Yes, I think it's 17.
Is there any out west? None? None out west, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all, they really kind of stop around Marion, McDowell County.
Okay.
So it's,
Watch
not
the
really, there's been a lot of
pussycat.
talk, Billy, in your area about Northwest AHEC. We've done a lot of interaction with them and other venues,
Okay.
some of the work that Vaya is doing. But I will say, just going back for a minute, Dr. Blake Fagan, who is a very well-known physician here in Western North Carolina, works at MAHEC. He has been doing all the medication assisted treatment and going out to primary care, and he's just been a champion, a one-man champion. I think we've all really appreciated him. He's had a great interest, and after he even spoke to me a little bit at the executive steering committee this meeting, even though MAHEC doesn't cover some of the counties east of McDowell County, they have had a great interest in providing physician training and working with other people in those areas and really networking.
What about West?
Well, West, he's done a great job. I mean, just really phenomenal, the number of physicians they've trained. Gina was right, they've offered all kinds of free training to physicians. What I think he talked a little bit about the other night was for the Medicaid assisted treatment was getting physicians to feel comfortable doing it and to really to engage in it and to really feel they have the skills to treat it. I think we have I think he reported out on that. I'm looking at Jeannie and Jim and all they were
he
there.
talked about actually, there's, was 80 or so that
It
had
was
gone
like
through.
80 or 88, yeah.
And that,
physicians trained.
but yet the prescribing was not following the
Correct.
certifications, and that their next step would be to try to go in and offer more support
Mhm.
to those practices to, get down sort of the workflow and that sort of thing.
I think in regard to, all this conversation about pregnant women and these babies, it's been so dynamic, and many of you may or may not know, many of you are very involved in your communities, but these coalitions, I think that, again, I'm always respectful to Buncombe and how people see the resources and all the things here, but Ronnie, to your point, or Gary, to your point, a lot of our staff have been participating. We have a consultant that works with Donald's team, Les and Corey, who goes out, has a tremendous amount of experience in these pregnant women with babies, and really trying to sit and offer what we can, but it is really about just pulling every finite resource together. None of this is funded very well at all, and it's a crisis.
So these babies, when they're took away from their mother, so if they're not reunited within 12 months, what do they do, terminate parental rights?
The federal government sets the standard that says that when a child is removed from the home, that you should do all reasonable efforts to reunify that family within 12 months. They do that so that to put.
Well, I get that part, but what happens if they don't do that? What are the mother's rights if they don't, and the child's rights to be with that mother? If in 12 months, for some reason, they don't meet that deadline, what happens then?
Then it's going to be the
Foster care or adoption.
The individual DSS is going to see what's happening.
But they can terminate parental rights after 12 months.
They can, and Pat, I want to be sensitive, and I may be I don't want to misinterpret your point. Yes, they can. I think the system is in a major dilemma based on this federal rule of these 12 months. Opioid recovery treatment alone, as well as anybody, the length of time that takes. So you have someone who gets really dedicated, like Jim's story, at 9 months. Well, that recovery and the stabilization of that woman or that family at the end of 3 more months is not going to be ready to really take on this baby. So you know, the rules are old with what we know about recovery. I mean, to me, we're always in this tension with the historical rules that I think govern DSS and parental rights and these families and children and many, many aspects, and what we know about what it takes to get a baby back or a child back in a family. So I think we're all very sensitive that, I mean, I go to the BUCA meeting sometimes and I hear these 200-300 babies that need foster care. I mean, it's horrific, you know, of the situation.
I think 10 times more are in the custody of their grandparents, great-grandparents, other family members. I mean,
Absolutely.
we have a CFAC member that had 2 kids basically almost a year ago dropped off, and the baby eventually went home a couple months ago before Christmas. But one day last week, and DSS kept saying, well, we want to wait till this guy goes to court and all this goes to court. Then all of a sudden, they just come and jerked the 7-year-old out of the home. And I had said all along, you know, they're going to take this child back within a year. DSS needs to get this child, you know, and the year's coming up. And neither family was exactly ready, but all of a sudden, well, we know this has been put off and put off and put off in the court system, but we want this child to go back over there and live till they go to court in April or whenever and see how things go from now to then. It wasn't about that. It was about if they were going to do anything as far as reunification, and this is another CFAC member, they had to jerk this child out and get it back in the home, or that deadline was approaching. And then that, you know, that's all this is clicking in my head, which tells me that might not have been what was best for the child. Hopefully it was, but, you know, for months they've been telling this relative, well, you have to keep this child. This child's out of the home till this mother's husband or boyfriend or whatever goes to court for all these charges, and then we'll talk about it. But all of a sudden, it kept getting put off in the court system, but they just stick the child back in there that was nearly killed by this person anyway.
The county DSSs too are under a lot of pressure. I don't know if everybody realizes it, but we're getting a lot of pressure from the legislature to pick up those kids and get them out of those homes.
Yeah.
So what people don't realize is that we're getting pressure and DSS is getting pressure from the legislature to do that. And so it's not a easy, back to your slide about silver bullet, you know, there's no silver bullet answer to the DSS world either.
And when when they take the child away, the mother loses her Medicaid funding. So there she goes, she's no housing, no food, and before she can get the child back, she can't. I mean, it's just a huge financial disincentive.
Well, that's not always the case, because when these 2 children in the middle of the night got dropped off somewhere, with no support because they were going to a family member, they didn't get anything. Wick kept going to the other house. I mean, it was the most ridiculous. And we're talking about a baby under a year old that needed the products that Wick was supposed to supply.
Let me try to keep moving here. Those are the 9 priorities. Each priority has multiple strategies. There's a lead agency assigned to each of the activities along with performance measures. You know, trying to be very concrete about getting things done and measuring the impact. Despite the fact that we're, you know, in terms of the alliance that we're just now into the implementation phase, it's not like things haven't been happening all along. We did a little bit of a summary here on the things that have been occurring. A lot of effort been put into medication-assisted treatment, specialized programs, or for that venue, outreach, engagement, and prevention. So again, those are just the categories of the activities that have been underway. The CURES grant. This is all about folks that do not have Medicaid. Okay, here we are again. McDonald's folks, kind of came up with these metrics. There were about 100 or so that we were serving before. This has allowed us to increase the number served by about 400, so 500 net. And you see we've already used up all the money to date for that, or if not, it's just a matter of kind of making the numbers reconcile. So how quickly, we're able to go through that it's one-time funding, CARES grant. Although there is an allocation for next fiscal year, do we believe?
We're expecting an allocation any day now, for the remainder of this fiscal year. We expect it'll be probably around roughly another $400,000. But we talked about the expense of somebody in the program. Once you get someone on that, it's not like they're rotating a lot of new people on and off, so they're trying to figure out how we get more people served.
Does service mean treatment?
Yes.
So if your dad works at home,
So
see them do the walk-in
medication-assisted
clinic, get
treatment.
detox, they have nowhere to go. Boston's full, ADAC's full.
Most of this funding, Ronnie, is in relationship to outpatient treatment, medication-assisted treatment.
If they fail the assessment, that's a joke now too, the assessment for a joke, so that's another thing we need to tackle.
And, people asked about, and I guess Donald and others, the different types of medications that are used in medication-assisted treatment. And really, the variables you're looking at here are with methadone, it's a daily dose versus other medications that are longer acting. And Vivitrol, I think, is an injection that lasts a month, right? And of course, costs more. So you see, you've got all of these factors that affect the usability and the cost for the individual. There's one that, we're working on in, is that in Waynesville? Yeah, QHC there?
Yeah, in Watauga.
Watauga? Okay.
How many counties do not have a medication-assisted treatment facility in the county in our catchment?
Probably, we're currently contracted with 11 of the 14 clinics that are in western North Carolina. Some of those are right outside of our catchment border, so I can't tell you exactly how many people have one. Probably, there's probably at least 15 or so that don't. Some of them are going to have multiples.
Let's talk about Buncombe West, how many do you have there?
Geographically, in that county, not contracted.
Geographic, say that
I
again.
mean, that they have a facility within their geographic borders, not, they don't have to travel.
Less than half would have one. West, there's one in Waynesville. And
It ain't west or the foothill.
West of my house. So, we have to build what, it's not like we have money, we can go out there and like plant a new facility somewhere out there. We gotta tie into some existing clinics that are out there. We've had some conversations with some counties, clearly would be more progressive in that, Ronnie, but a lot of counties don't want a clinic in their county, to be honest with you. And
We just got so lucky, a man that's coming, Dr. Matt Helm, you all might know Matt. He's up in that point in Macon County that's being paid for by 2 individuals. So we're looking for him in office, the building one for free to get in.
They're more than open to contracting with those facilities.
You don't have to fool with him. It's, I don't know how you're gonna make it sustainable,
Well,
but we don't care.
a lot of them are
One-time.
sustainable off of private pay, because once individuals get in there, they tend to return. If they need that medication daily, then they'll pay out of their pocket or whatever they need to do. A lot of the clinics, when we first got the CARES money, didn't want to contract with us, because once they take Medicaid and state funds, it's actually less revenue for them than trying to get individuals to pay out of their pocket.
Appalachian has a doctor that
Yes.
is prescribed.
A lot of our efforts and expansion is more into using the new OBOT policy, trying to expand with primary care as opposed to trying to bring in a new methadone clinic. It's not real cost effective, especially in rural counties. Partnering with the FQHCs and partnering with primary care to expand capacity there is a lot better effort than us trying to bring up new methadone clinics.
But our death rate per capita is higher than the metropolitan counties. That's a problem.
It's clearly a problem.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
yet, they're the ones who get the methadone clinics, the highly populated counties, but yet per capita, the rural counties is showing that the death rate is going like this.
Yeah, numbers.
Yeah.
We have that too.
It's not from lack of effort, it could be lack of resources, that's for sure. But
And stigma.
the problem with expanding the OBOT with primary care is, you know, they're using Suboxone, they're not using methadone. And Suboxone, the cost of that is expensive. So in this new allocation that we're getting from the state, we're actually gonna have a pot of money carved out just to pay for medications. So we can now begin, once we get that allocation, having deeper conversations with primary care around, if you're willing to prescribe, we can help cover the cost of some of these medications in your community, which will definitely help some of those efforts in the
What we
rural.
forget, had we done Medicaid expansion in our state, we wouldn't be having a conversation.
Well, there still wouldn't be enough, but it'd be a lot better.
Oh.
And the primary care doctors are overworked already, and people are going into specialties, and so rural counties are having a hard time getting primary care doctors, and this is adding something else to them. But I agree, that's one of the ports you need to get into.
We had one physician who ran a Suboxone clinic about 10 years ago. She did it for 2 years and then she moved. But even while she was there was this stigma that she was just there to attract the drug users and the easy money.
Swapping one drug for another.
She was so stigmatized by the fact that she was
That's, you know, and that's the point I was sort of leading up to earlier. You know, we have this evidence-based treatment. This is the best possible care that people can receive to help them with their addiction, yet there's a tremendous amount of stigma associated with it. I mean, think of any analogy you want to in you know, physical medicine. Like if you had to take insulin,
Yeah.
people were really giving you a hard time, okay?
Right.
A big hard time. The doctors didn't even want to do it, and it's the same thing.
But here's the difference, if you're taking insulin, let's say, Ronnie, you just need to eat 22 little babies instead of
Yeah,
40. And nobody says a word.
This is a really good program in Waynesville. You want to talk about the LEAD thing
Yeah,
now?
so the LEAD program is a grant program that we're working with Waynesville Police Department on. It's really substance abuse diversion. If somebody comes in, they've already worked with the DA, low-level misdemeanor drug use, if the person's willing to engage in treatment and become part of the LEAD program. There's some grant money in there to help pay for the medications and pay for the treatment for the person, so you can divert people from the local jail system who are willing to engage in treatment. So we're working with that in Waynesville in the NC harm reduction as the main contact of doing outreach to these people and trying to keep them engaged in treatment. I think it's the same thing we talked about on the pregnant women's side is you got to find that engagement point where they're really motivated to engage. This tends to be a really great engagement point, right? They're at the precipice of going into the jail, and if you want to take this other option, you can not go into jail. So it provides an option of engagement to get them into treatment. And once you can get them on medicated assisted treatment, the opportunity for them to engage in the psychoeducational part of the treatment increases significantly.
How old is the program?
It's brand new.
Who started?
Yes.
And you're getting positive feedback from the DAs on this?
So far, the DA is extremely supportive. The sheriff in Waynesville has been a huge champion for this in the area. It's one of the reasons why we got the grant for the areas, because the sheriff was such on board and such pushing. And that's the key piece in any diversion effort in the community, is you got to have a strong sheriff and a strong DA that's you know, open to the idea of diversion instead of incarceration.
And the county bears the cost of that incarceration, not to mention the physical toll on the inmates, but yeah.
Correct.
The kiosks in all the counties, again, are a good opportunity for people to engage in kind of their own evaluation of their needs. They can speak directly to someone in our call center and have an appointment scheduled for them. So again, that opportunity to self-identify and
Has that been pretty popular?
Very
We've seen
popular.
numbers on that. I know
Where
we've got them.
We got a lot of good feedback in our 8 counties that our CPAC represents, of how grateful they are that it's there and that they have learned where they can turn.
1,428 mental health screenings in 2017, 113 substance abuse screenings in 2017. So, like I said, averages out to be about 5 people a day.
Yeah, ours is in our library in a nice private spot, so it's good.
Brian, you have QHC, that's Federal Qualified Health Centers. And how many do we have?
Across our whole catchment area, 8 or 9.
You got a list of where they're at?
There would be a guess. Yes, there is a
You can
list.
send it to all the board members.
Say that again?
Send the list out.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. And we have relationships with some and not others. It just depends on if they're willing to work with us.
But it seems like a funding source that could be tapped more.
We enjoy our relationships with the FQHCs that like partnering with us.
We have the ability to generate revenue, more Medicaid revenue than our providers because it's a directly reimbursed cost-based rate.
They get higher Medicaid rates and higher Medicare rates at their facilities, so it's a good partnering for some of our providers in local communities too, because at their higher rates, especially on the Medicare, our providers are usually only getting about 50% reimbursement for Medicare on their rates, so they're really hard for them to maintain them.
Needle exchange, another one, every area is excited about that, but yet some areas, and I was really surprised by the metrics about this, now as folks estimated, there's 150 people a day that visit these sites. And again, that's another opportunity to engage with that individual through a peer or other venues, kind of whatever works for people.
Another contact point.
And Michael Harney is the most wonderful person that helped start this here, Marty Prairie, and so devoted to making sure this works. So we spent some time with Marty and got him some needles. Wonderful person.
I would just say as we do a better job with that, the issue is always going to be the availability of treatment funding. You saw that if we weren't getting another allocation for cures this year, we'd be out. And we would basically be cutting treatment options off across the catchment area. There'd be nowhere for anybody uninsured to go for services. So we'd be outreaching to people saying, hey, you need to get into treatment, but nowhere to send them. Those are 2 big pieces. Those reductions in our single stream funding have significantly impacted our ability to continue to treat the need.
There was some prevention money associated with the CARES grant, and those 5 counties each got, I guess, $70,000 or so dollars. And again, it's kind of more of the grassroots type of activities.
Yeah, so this one is going to be funding a prevention person to work across those counties on really helping those coalitions in those counties really be targeted and make sure we have good prevention activities across the system. So we're excited about that, where we can focus those prevention activities to this effort.
Here's where you kind of go to the grassroots level, and there's a lot of great things that can be done. And that I would really try to emphasize that in the beginning in the whole approach to this. All the lock boxes that are out there, so all those pills, all those prescriptions, get them out of people's medicine cabinets. Drop them off in a lock box. This is mind-boggling here. We've done, what's the volume of?
4 tons.
4 tons. Crazy.
So are y'all giving away lock boxes, or how's that working, or is in those 5 counties, or?
Well, no, that's across all 23 counties, those lock boxes, and those are coming directly from our regular prevention efforts. So not just the cures prevention individuals, but all of our prevention efforts, like RHA does in 5 of our counties. And then we have 2 other prevention providers who provide the other ones.
I know a lot of the commercials I've been seeing and saying, so you might want to target some older adults, but most of the young people on drugs are getting the drugs from their grandparents' medicine cabinets. So eventually I'd like to get me one of those lock boxes even if I have to pay for it, because just to have one because, you know, we're grandparents and we have issues that we occasionally take medication for. But, you know, some of the commercials I have been watching are saying, you know, they're not getting them from the streets, at least the young people, they're getting them from the grandparents' medicine cabinets.
So one of the greatest prevention efforts, of course, is keeping people alive. You have a great opportunity when someone is, you know, had a reversal or, you know, had a very significant overdose experience to get them engaged with treatment. So, you know, it's the saving the life, and it's the engagement with treatment that we've really worked very, very, very hard on. And it's really timing as much as anything. You know, we were the first to have the nasal spray used. And, you know, it's a little tough to always know how directly these related to reversals, the estimate of 127 and that kind of first go around. And then, long story short, we kind of helped out the state with their purchase of Narcan, and kind of worked out that we got a lot of extra kits. They're that 5,400, and you know, it's kind of like the dog that catches the car, because it's a lot of work to turn the raw, you know, supply of nasal injectors into little kits and baggies. And I know you guys, you know, were part of the, you know, many of you were part of the press conference and did the video, so we really tried to turn that into a kind of a big experience with, you know, educating people about why we're doing this and what's involved with it. And, you know, and we did the, you know, the video and had the governor come and all of that, but that's been a, you know, just very successful for
And
us.
that's, once again, evidence-based, but you need to, we get some pushback of multiple overdose reversals on a single patient. But that goes to, it takes multiple times for treatment in this substance use disorder. And you gotta accept that. And the courts need to realize that too. Instead of penalizing these people, they need to be part of the solution to, here, you're on the path to treatment. You don't need to go back to jail, you need to keep on this treatment.
Treat treatment for dead.
We could read, I don't think we ever played the whole video for you, and several of you are on it, so we wanted to do that.
Hope it's not too embarrassing.
Not at all.
While he's getting that started, a couple real life stories. Our mobile crisis teams have saved quite a few lives with Narcan. And we had an individual show up at our one of our facility-based crisis. It took 5 doses to bring her back because she was on the fentanyl. We had to take her fentanyl.
Mikhail, it's a separate file.
An individual show up at 356 last week that gave his therapist a bag of heroin because he said he would kill himself if she didn't take it. So.
Now here's I don't know, you can decide if this is a good story or a bad story. In the LEAD program, Donald's folks were telling me about this, stealing his thunder a little bit. There was a seller in the Waynesville area that was giving his clients Narcan as a preventive measure because he knew what he was giving them was so strong that there was a risk to their life. So,
Multiple motivations.
Wow.
Better find it.
What a business plan. He didn't want them dying, he wanted them coming back. Right?
I think, to Ronnie's point, we were attending a session on like protecting EMS and firefighters from some of this stuff, and but they told this story. They asked the dealers, well, why would you give them something that's going to kill your clientele? And the dealer said, well, I only need to kill one, and then everybody's going to come to me.
Wow.
That's right.
Because they know it's strong.
Yeah. And they're also having these Narcan parties where groups of addicts will get together and one of them will be ready to bring somebody back.
Oh, wow.
And they're encouraging families to have it, I mean, because these overdoses happen in families' houses.
all right, here we go.
My name is Bill Hall.
always said, oh, chief of police and label, and this can save a life.
Yeah, I mean.
This can save a life.
I just cover the money and the executive director of Sunrise Community, recovery office. This is the one.
Hi, my name is Matt Gannon with Vaya Health. This can save a life.
I'm volunteer and volunteer and this can save a life.
The light noise from making two, and this can save a lot.
I'm Senator Terry Van and this can save a life.
I'm Jacob Willis, Mitchell County Commissioner, and this will save a life.
I'm Dr. Jim Hardy from Michigan Behavioral Health, and this can save a life.
Hi, I'm Dr. Matt Hammer, Mayor of the City of Asheville.
My name is Brian McEnany, I'm the Jackson County Commissioner.
I'm Dr. Craig Martin, Vaya Chief Medical Officer, and this RVA can save a life.
I'm Rick O'Neill, Clinical Director for Cherokee Law School, and this can save a life.
Hello, everyone. I'm Director County Manager Avery. I'm Tim Dose, County Commissioner Avery. And this can save a life. This can save a life.
My name is Ashley Woodcounty, McAllen County Manager. This can save a life.
My name is Jesse Snyder, Vaya Head, and this can save a life.
Yeah, my name is Representative John Aker, and this can save a life in my home community of Fairfield.
I'm Sue Bolton from Sunrise Community and this can save a life.
I'm Brian Eager from Vaya Health. I'm the CEO here, and I just want you to know that this can save a life.
I'm North Carolina Governor Boyko, and this can save a life.
Okay.
Brian,
Nice job.
with a lot of just the standard people, normal people, whatever you want to call it, you know, we're seeing the people out on the streets and the ones in this. How are we going to be able to get into the IDD community to see how many that are in group homes, that are in different facilities, that are addicted to this stuff, but nobody seems to be able to know how to handle it, or even look at it?
I know one of the things that I plan to do with the IDD subcommittee is something that RHA is doing right now, is we are doing a cross-company audit, I guess if you'd say, of all individuals that are in our group homes who happen to have an opioid as a prescription. And I think that's our starting point, just to see what's going on. And that's one of the recommendations that I plan to make at our next IDD subcommittee when we start, you know, working on this plan, is we need to know what the scope of the issue is.
That's my thing. Great, I'll be
So,
back.
okay.
There you go. I knew she could answer the question a lot better than I could.
Good.
The DD Council is also doing a huge campaign in 2018 to just educate people, because I think as who's been out exposed to that kind of information and the data from the CDC, I think companies like Genie and other companies are gonna have to just really help us find that information.
Thank you.
I've been approached for the possibility of scheduling a medication take back in Wilson. I think it was early April, but it was the date they mentioned. Is there any information or support from Vaya for doing that? Or is there some resource that I need to refer to them? I think it's gonna probably go through, I know the sheriff's involved and some other organizations.
We can make sure, I think between Dawn and I, can make sure that your folks are connected with some people who have a lot of experience in that, and
Okay.
can do that. Be more than glad to help.
We've
So
been doing
please
that
let us know.
Sorry, we've been doing that about 10 years in Watauga.
Yeah, well,
Started
we've had
with the
past-
river keepers and the sheriff, and now the sheriff's got a box they can drop off, no questions asked, and a couple times a year. They're just in the parking lot on our, actually it's on our hazardous waste day. And you can just drive by and hand them stuff and drive on.
The advertisement there is huge.
Yeah, the marketing.
The marketing of it is ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, what we have next, we had asked last night, Billy, about a way to compare fund balance and cash information across LME MCO. So we found a file that we look at internally that has really gives you a lot of perspective about everybody's money. So we can take a look at that, and Clark can walk you through it. Go ahead. I don't know how you want to scale it so people can see it.
Yeah, can you bring it up just a little bit, Mikhail?
Just do one column at a time or something. One section
Yeah.
at a time.
So what we have here is a set of columns that, and a set of lines that show the individual LME MCOs down one side, and then we, yeah, figure. And then as we go across, we have various columns that relate to Medicaid, state, federal, and other, and a total. So this is the cash balance that we have for each LME MCO, and this is the total of those cash balances. As you can see, $749 million. Now, I think, Brian, you mentioned last night somebody threw out a soundbite of $1 billion. That would probably include this $263 million that's in the Medicaid risk reserve, which we can't really touch. So let's focus on the $749 million that we have in cash. While that is true, that's an accurate cash balance. That doesn't account for all of the things that we have to pay out of that are already incurred, so to speak. For instance, claims, we have to pay out of that, accounts payable items, and if you scroll on down a little bit, I don't know if I have
Maybe before you leave that, let's just do a little bit more with that chunk of information. So if you want a kind of a raw look at how much money each of us have in a comparative fashion, you look at column F. Okay? And again, there's much more to the story about what kind of obligations are associated with that, but that's the number you start off with that you start working against.
Right.
And you see there's a lot of differences. And, you know, I tend to do this a little differently, you know, as far as understanding it, and kind of go to the right side here and look at kind of the cash situation, who's making a profit, who's losing money, all of that, before we kind of get into all the things that we take away from the big number. So again, we're not able to freeze the left column to see who's who here. But you see the year-to-date profit. Everybody but one program, which I think is East Point or Sand Hills, East Point, is losing money. Okay? So again, you think about the trend. Think about the trend we looked at last night. You know, everybody's losing some amount of money, except for one. And I think this is typically, I mean, if we were to go back and we get these every month, you know, Alliance and Cardinal have typically been making money, and now even they are kind of have gotten to the point where, you know, it's a negative. The other way to think about the money too, and this is a, you know, very important point. If you keep going to the right, if you look at the medical expense ratio, and this is something we talk about a lot, how much of the service money is actually being utilized for services. And there's a very, very important metric in managed care business, and it's a contractual requirement. So you see it calculated both on the admin side and the service side, and very high numbers there. So it's not like people, so again, this is facts that go against the sound bites. Are people not getting services because they're squirreling away money. No. No. And no. There's the absolute proof of it, okay? But a lot of times when things are said, it's just the words come out of people's mouth, there's no basis for it. Okay, so here's the facts about that. I mean, if you were to go and kind of drill down into this even further, our denial rate on authorizations is like something like 1%, I think. We do very little denial of care. So it's all this just, you know what it is? It's fake news, Billy.
So what is it?
The facts don't support the
That's true,
assertions that are being made.
What's an administrative Medicaid expense ratio?
Okay,
I
so
thought that was
yeah.
the other part of it, service.
Well, this is a little bit different than the medical loss ratio that you saw last night.
Oh, okay, that's not.
Okay, the medical loss ratio that we showed last night is the medical services against the entire base of revenue.
Right.
Whereas these are calculated on just the revenue related to services and the revenue related to administration.
And when it's over 100%, that's a
You're
loss.
losing money.
It's
Yeah.
costing more than you get in.
Yes.
So, a very important factor, again, we can tie this back to the conversations we had about the budget last year. One, an enormous factor around our ability to budget has to do with the rate that's negotiated and how much, admin is going to be paid for. So what you're seeing is that in these cases, the funding is not supporting the administrative cost all across the board.
And I can promise you in the finance committee, we spend a great deal of time going over and over and over and looking and re-looking and asking questions of this information every month. So we spend a lot of
So,
time looking at
to
this.
summarize, there's something like 740 million out there if you want to add in risk reserve. And again, you're basically, how many things do you want to add in that can't be touched? Okay? And that's the part that's very confusing for people. And it's used to mislead people from the facts, is really what it is. So if you go below,
Yeah, go back over and, Mikhail, and then scroll down. So there's our cash balance of 749. Now, the IBNR
stop right there.
and the accounts payable is about $219 million. So that's expenses that have already been incurred that we owe, which will draw against that $749 million.
So that's like when you go to balance your checkbook and you have outstanding checks, you just forget about that amount of money? Well, hopefully not. But again,
No, if you don't.
if you add up to get to this $1 billion, that would be what you would be doing, okay?
And if you scroll down just a little more, Mikhail, there are dollars that we are required to spend for the single stream funding reduction. That's another $55 million. So if you take those things, those two items alone out of the roughly $50 million, that only leaves you $475 million. And as we also talked about last night, we talked about this 30 days of cash as a minimum. Well, 30 days worth of cash is worth about $260 million to the LME MCO. So if you were to back off 30 days worth of cash at $260 million, that would take you down to about $215 million throughout the entire system. And if you were to take one more month, which we really think 60 days is the right number, you'd be underwater on cash by $45–50 million.
That's how simple it is to understand this. And what's the soundbite?
It's $1 billion, close to $1 billion, 200 million, that's $1 billion.
What's the reality?
Well, I might try to be a little more clear on some of this when they do my next review at the county commission and point out some of those. That's a good clarification thing.
Well, I may not understand it, but are you showing that from the perspective of that's your cash flow, or that's what you actually have budgeted?
That's actual cash. That's
Is
what's
that
what's in the bank.
Right, I understand fund balance, but I mean, are you saying that that's what you are using for your cash flow when your
Yes.
other revenue hasn't come in yet? Or are you saying, we've budgeted fully that fund balance? I just don't know the answer to that. Is that?
Yeah, that
Does
is.
that make sense? What I'm hearing is that you're actually using that as budgeted money. Is that true, or? Am I hearing that
If I
correctly?
understand your question correctly, I think the answer is yes.
So you're budgeting the fund balance, the full amount of fund balance for your operations? Is that how that works?
Well,
We're not using the full amount of fund balance to balance our budget. We use some amount of fund balance is part of our operating cost. And we're required to use some of it for the single stream funding.
Yes.
So some of the fund balance is in everyday use.
But most of that is used to help drive cash flow issues. Is that what, am I hearing that?
I mean, occasionally we don't get paid on time from the state. I mean, occasionally, it's chronically, so we use basically to manage the float. Yeah, so we will advance payments to providers when we don't have the cash. So part of it is a float issue. But that's not exactly the point, Jim. I mean, happy to answer, all your questions. It's really to show how much of that cash is real cash, is spendable in the way you think of as cash. Most of it's locked up and can't be touched. Very little of it, we're down to, if you take the risk reserve, if you take all of that out of things that we can't spend the risk reserve, just like we can't spend the money that's already committed to pay bills, right? And all these other things. If you take all of those things off the table, you end up with what, 250?
250 or 215, so.
And probably half of that is cardinal. So if you want to just make it all real, that's it, right there.
And how does, and I think what Jim's question is really more about cash flow, but these are cash flow at the end of December, right?
Correct.
So you wouldn't expect cash to come in to pay those bills, but so does this trend this way?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a basic trend.
Yeah, it's not going to be, there's always going to be a big hunk of money that's there.
Right.
It just changes a little bit each month.
Still don't have a lot of cash.
Right. It's not like it goes to zero and all of a sudden we go, oh my gosh, look, we got an extra $3 million because we don't owe anybody anything this month.
Isn't there a Medicaid mandated fund reserve?
Risk reserve.
Risk reserve that has to be there. And then the state, haven't we been making that up, or?
Yeah.
You
Now it has
clarified that, I
to
don't know
come
if Jim
out
was
of,
here when that went on.
now it has to come out of our hide. Originally, when the waiver was set up, the state paid that. But now that's switched and we pay it, even though we don't have any access to it. Hell, Western Highlands, when everybody, when the sky was falling, owed people money, didn't know how much money they had, it was just a catastrophe. You think they'd let you use that risk reserve then?
No, we begged and begged and begged and begged and pleaded and begged and had them come up, and the answer was, no, we don't care if you fold tomorrow, you're not gonna touch that money.
I feel bad about charging my motel room.
Let me put this in
You could donate
perspective from my world that I'm most familiar with, Bill, you'll appreciate this. If a commercial carrier, an insurance company, was operating at this margin, then the Department of Insurance would take up a residence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we would not meet the requirements for the Department of Insurance. The only way we meet our criteria, we are not required to meet the DOI requirements because basically the state is our ultimate risk reserve. That's why. So it doesn't apply to us.
Can you roll back to the Medicaid reserve?
Good point.
Mikhail,
Thank
can
you.
you scroll back up?
But you have to understand something to know that, right?
You got to
Keep going.
Keep
Been
going.
around the corner a
That's
time or
good.
two.
Had to be down in
$30
there.
million. Like $1 billion.
Big buck.
$1 billion.
Got a lot of siphons off of it.
Brian, share with the board the definition that they gave you and us about the Medicaid money that we can't touch. You just gave the example, you know, of a prime case where you think you could. So Brian, you give them the definition of what that is.
Well, what, between Clark and I, we've done is say, okay, you start off with this, what looks like this big number, okay? $750 million, and then what the heck, add in the Medicaid risk reserve. So you get, so there's your $1 billion, okay? Except the Medicaid risk reserve, that might as well be monopoly money. You're never gonna touch that, right? So you take that off the top, okay? And then you take off the top all the things you owe. So what are you gonna do, not pay? What about all the stuff that's accrued? What about, you know, we have to, in our budget, oh my God, if we were to close, how much we have to pay out for vacation? What was the name of that agency up in the north there that forgot to do that with their employees?
New River Mental Health.
Yeah. Well, we could do that.
That was before I became a commissioner.
We could just.
Me too, before my time.
We could just skip that $5 or $8 million worth of money that we would owe people, we just shut the doors. So that comes off the top, right? The whole point of this is when you take away all the things that we don't have, it's not, you know, it's not spendable. It's required to be there. And then you say, well, 30 days cash, I mean, that's like the bare minimum, right? Okay? You got a really small number that's left after that. Like now we're down to about 250 million. And again, probably half of that is Cardinal, because they're the biggest and they've been around the longest. So, you know, you take them out of the mix, boy, you got $100 million. That doesn't sound as good as $1 billion, does it?
Depends on what you're selling.
So what is the future of the, you know, we've seen it for years and years, the risk, the Medicaid risk. So nobody's able to give a good explanation. If we run out of cash, can we tax it? No. What's it there? Why?
It sits on somebody's books.
We never could
It's
understand.
not, you know, sort of not like real money. You know what I mean? It's, you know, numbers that are there. I mean, we pay it.
We can't touch it.
Correct. And we don't have control over it. It's almost like it's sort of like a tax, I guess you could say.
Penalty.
So anyway.
It's another way to reduce thanks. It's another way to reduce funding and.
Like the article that came out in the paper, really.
I know, I'm gonna talk to Thomas.
You make it look a certain way, okay, but these are the facts. Okay, these are the reports that go to the state every month. This is a summary from all of that information. What did I forget to mention, Clark?
I think you covered it, Brian.
I've never been through the budget process here, and I don't really understand the budget yet all that well, but one number that kind of sticks out is that minus 26 million under state and federal. That's more than the total for all of the others combined, if you count the ones that have a plus and minus. Is there some
Can you do that in about
easy
two
explanation?
sentences?
Yeah, or less. It looks odd.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can fully explain that without
Okay.
delving into it some more, but.
All right.
As
Maybe
you can
next
see, as
time.
you can see, there are others that are in a negative position under state and federal. You know, Alliance is $10 million under,
Yeah.
Trillium's $10 million under, we're 26 under. But on the local side, everybody's positive. So.
It
that-
may, yeah, it's probably a cash flow timing thing. because we end up spending all the money and, you know, getting all the money and spending all the money. And again, this is a good example. Yes, well, why do we have so many budget amendments? Well, because they tell us we're gonna get the money, except we don't know when we're gonna get it. And we go ahead and spend it. We do. Because providers would get, you know, they would suffer and consumers would suffer. So we go spend the money, and it's probably mostly that, right? That things haven't caught up to real. But Clark can give you a more detailed answer next month. Okay.
Good job, Clark. Real hard.
Yeah.
That's something to do with that shuttle issue they have.
Okay, we have a closed session, for items, closed session pursuant to North Carolina Statute 14318, 8.1A1, board prevent disclosure of competitive healthcare information that is privileged or confidential. North Carolina Statute 123.
Next meeting. Next stuff, no, probably this before then.
31811A3, is there a motion?
Motion to go to closed session.
I'll make the motion.
There's lots of seconds. All in favor, say aye. Aye.